We'll begin this morning with a reading from Unitarian Universalist minister A. Powell Davies, called it God, an Endless Pilgrimage of Possibility. God is the source of all life, of its spontaneities, of its joy, its music, its song, of its wisdom, its patience, its tenderness, of life, immense in passion, pulse, and power. God is also the God of tragedy, of pain, of anguish, of bereavement, of grief and tears. The God of all within us and about us and beyond us. To the free soul, no longer blinded by credulity and fettered by its own fears, God is an endless pilgrimage of possibility. To many, however, God will not seem to be that just now, and perhaps not that very soon. The old beliefs are crumbling, and the souls of modern people are lonely. All the world is rocked with tremors of impending doom, and everywhere are signs of dissolution. Where, then, is God? God is in the truth we find it harder to resist, the righteousness that claims us, the justice that rebukes us. Yes, and in that which thinks in our thoughts, shines in our dreams, builds with our hands, loves with our hearts. There is a hope, born like our own souls from fathomless mystery. This hope may sometimes flicker, but it never dies. It is the kindly light that leads the wanderer through a wilderness. When there is nothing else, there is this. And the fearful soul, beset with doubts, can still follow this light. It did not come from nowhere, no light does. It is the gift of God to every honest pilgrim who, having left behind the faiths that failed, sets forth anew, not knowing where the path may lead. And though I think there is more, very much more, that faith in God can do than we are ready for, it may be enough for the present if we follow that little kindly light of hope that never fails us, a light that none of us has kindled for ourselves, a light that belongs, as we do, to the mystery within us and beyond us, the mystery whose other, lovelier name is God. When I was a college student, I was a member of the UU congregation of Phoenix, and every Sunday or just about, I schlepped out on the bus, which those of you who have been to the Phoenix Metro Valley know how functional and expansive their public transit system is. It's not. There was like a mile walk at the end of it somehow. There were 2 buses and then a mile. But I made that trek regularly, and one year I taught the coming of age class for 7th and 8th graders at the congregation there. And one morning, our topic of the day, the lesson in the curriculum, was ideas about God. And the opening exercise began with brainstorming for the youth. It began by inviting us and inviting them to describe the God they did not believe in. And oh man, the pubescent energy was off the chain. They had so many ideas about the God they didn't believe in. They had great ideas. We filled an entire chalkboard with attributes, names, characteristics of the God they did not believe in. I won't tell you them all, but I will recall some highlights, which include has a long white beard, sits on a cloud, throne in the sky, shoots lightning bolts from his hands. It's like, it's not like Emperor Palpatine, guys. It's just God. And my favorite, talks like Shakespeare. I affirmed for them that these things did indeed describe the God they did not believe in, and for the most part, a God I did not believe in either. And then, of course, the second half of the exercise was to ask, describe the God you do believe in. Crickets. Many of them stumbled and fumbled for words. They said, it's not that I don't believe in anything, it's just, I don't know how to talk about it. And while these 7th and 8th graders, I think, were maybe a little more forthcoming during this exercise than a room full of Unitarian Universalist adults would be, I would venture to guess that the results would be about the same. We have lots of words and language. We've devoted a lot of time and energy and thought to describing and naming the God that we do not believe in, the faiths we have left behind and rejected, the ideas we have rejected. And we devote much less time and thought and energy to what would go in that second column then. How would you name? How would you name the divine? How would you describe their attributes? How would you tell someone about a God you did believe in, if you did? How would you tell someone about those things beyond your human understanding? Because the reality is that no matter how smart or advanced we get as human beings, there will always be things that are beyond our understanding, beyond our language, beyond our capacity to comprehend in their fullness. Whether you call that God or not, at some point in our lives, we all grapple with that edge of our human understanding, the limits of our capacity. I think of it this way sometimes, that reaching the edge of our human capacity to understand, whether it's just other people, the world we live in, or the cosmos beyond us, as standing at the edge of a cliff and looking down into a deep ravine, a deep canyon whose bottom we cannot see. Standing at the edge of that cliff, right, we reach the edge of our human understanding and look down. And some of us, upon looking down, are immediately overcome with vertigo. Right? The vertigo of being overwhelmed at the depth of all that we do not know and do not understand and will never fully know or understand. But there we are on the edge. And the thing about Unitarian Universalism as a religious tradition is that we have come to the place where we declare that how we are with one another in community, all gathered there on that ledge, is far more important than what any one of us thinks or supposes is at the bottom. That how we are together, how we are with one another as a community, is what binds us, not some shared certainty about what lies at the bottom of the fathomless pit. And goodness knows, our world is full of people who will declare with such certainty, such bold certainty, that they know exactly what is at the bottom, and that you're wrong and they're right, though they have never been there, just like you. They put restrictions around how they define the holy, how they define God. They put it in the box that Reverend Christina described from her fundamentalist Christian background and history. There is a clear delineation of what is an acceptable way to name the divine, to experience the divine, the attributes God has or doesn't have. But a funny thing about Unitarian Universalism is that we sort of began by, like, in our history, sort of putting a toe outside the box, flirting with there maybe not being a Trinity. Oh, heresy. And so we flirted with heresy for many generations until we finally declared that there wasn't a box in the first place. And so people like me who grew up in this contemporary version of Unitarian Universalism, it's a strange thing. There was never a box. There was never a set of restrictions or limitations or predefinitions of who or what God was or wasn't, or what attributes they did or didn't have, or names they did or didn't carry. And I didn't realize that I had grown up without this box until I went to a Methodist seminary and said things like, "How do you know that God has arms?" Which scandalized the Methodists. You should have seen the faces when I told them I wasn't baptized. It was like the floor just opened and hell claimed me. It was amazing. So good. So we don't have the box, though many of us are still carrying the boxes from our traditions we grew up in, dismantling them bit by bit over time. But we don't have the box. And so sometimes not having the box feels freeing and wonderful and invites us to spectacular possibility, and sometimes not having the box feels like standing at the edge of the cliff with your toes hanging over it and nothing there to stop you from plummeting into the bottomless pit. Sometimes a lack of structure feels scary. And so I want to invite us this morning as we consider how we name the divine, how we describe our experience of God, how we describe the holy as it moves in our own lives. I want to invite us, as many of our national parks have done at popular cliff overhangs, to put up some guardrails, lest any of us fall into the abyss. The first guardrail I want to offer is, does it challenge you? Does this way of naming the divine, does this attribute of God, does it challenge you a little bit? And sure, there are times where the embrace of the divine should feel like a warm hug, but if it always feels like a warm hug and it never feels like a teacher's stare or your mother's look of disappointment, if it never feels like those things, you might need some recalibration. Because experiencing the divine should unsettle us. It should remind us that we are not complete, that we still have growing to do, that we're not perfect, that even when we are striving to be our best, we inevitably harm other people, and every once in a while, we need a kick in the pants. We need to be challenged to growth. Does it expand your understanding? Does it broaden you? Does it rub a little bit like sandpaper? So the first guardrail is, does it challenge you? The second guardrail I want to offer is, does it center you? Does it ground you? You know, this month we're talking all about peace in the storm, about the storms that rage around us. And just like our horizons and our spirits need to be expanded and challenged, they also need to be centered and grounded and connected. They need to be able to withstand some of life's storm. Does this way of understanding God connect you to the people around you? Which sometimes that's the hardest. To have an experience of the divine that connects you to other people in all of their peopleness, which is not all great? Does it connect you to the things that matter most? That's the second guardrail. And the third guardrail is, does it cultivate hope? Because I do not know about you, but for me, one of the things about standing on that edge of the cliff and looking down into the deep, bottomless chasm of human inadequacy is not always a hope-inducing experience. There have been many times in my own life where the realities of grief, of loss, of human suffering, of the terrible things we are capable of doing to one another, of the terrible things that happen to the people we love, when I stare into those, that flicker of hope that A. Powell Davies described feels hard to find. But that's one of the reasons that we gather in community, is that we are here for one another to say that you're not alone, staring down into the abyss, and we will ensure that you don't stay there. Because it's okay to be there. It's okay to look down into the abyss and call it what it is, which is confusing and terrifying and awful. It's okay to argue with God in Unitarian Universalism, to doubt, to be angry, to grapple, to wrestle. All of that is good and holy work at the edge of that cliff. But our commitment to one another is that we won't let you stay there. Which is not to say you won't go back there again. But we won't let you stay there either. And sometimes our hesitancy to name and describe our experience of the divine means that we get stuck there. And sometimes, I know my experience of Unitarian Universalists is that we sometimes think that we are like too smart for optimism. Yes. We're too reasonable to think that we might have hope because we know about the truth of the human condition. And so I will invite us, as we think about cultivating that hope in our experience and naming of the divine, I will turn us to the words of Felix Adler. And these words appear in our hymnal. It's hymn number 140. It's called Hail the Glorious Golden City. It is one of my favorites. It's a real banger on pipe organ, I assure you, which is why it's the kind of thing we do not sing here at the fellowship very much. Yes, this is a place where the banger on pipe organ flavor of Unitarian Universalism is harder to come by, though I grew up in a congregation with the bangers on pipe organ. And Felix Adler, though you wouldn't necessarily know it to hear the hymn, Felix Adler is a founder of American humanism. He's one of the founders of ethical culture and the American Ethical Union. He is one of the most prominent historical humanists, meaning that he was part of a movement of religious humanism, of gathering in religious community that declared itself unconcerned with whether or not you believed in God. And he wrote these words: "And the work that we have builded, oft with bleeding hands and tears, oft in error, oft in anguish, will not perish with our years. It will live and shine transfigured in the final reign of right. It will pass into the splendors of the city of the light." That is as poetic a description of hope in the face of human foibles as I can find in our hymnal. We will get it wrong. We will cry and bleed and be human. But that doesn't mean it lacks meaning. And that's part of why we need one another, to help us mind the many guardrails atop the cliff, to hold one another when we stumble, to remind us of that small flicker of hope that kindles in each of us, to experience it as that fathomless mystery, who perhaps for some of us bears the name God. May it be so. Amen.